green spawn, killing a German diplomat, and of course, Joseph Goebbels being excited by that fact. Now, what does he try to do? As I said, he's going to try to turn the German people against the Jews. And so, here's what he did. He got a bunch of members of people that were called the black shirts, brown shirts, similar. They were loyalists to the Nazi Party, and they went out through all of Germany, a lot of Berlin, and they broke windows of German businesses. And the general mentality was that the Jews had done this, and that the Jews were responsible, and that the Jews must hold to be accountable. Now, this event in history becomes known as Kristallnacht, Night of Glass. Some people say Night of Broken Glass, similar. And this was a Nazi propaganda tactic to get the German people to turn on the Jews, to allow them to move into their next plan. And the next plan was utter control of the Jews. Remember, Nuremberg laws took away their rights. They're still there, and so now the whole idea was to turn against them and to turn them into the Nazis whenever possible, and etc. They became seen as criminals. Now, in order to achieve this, the Nazis had a secret police set up, and this Nazi secret police was called the Gestapo, because they Stapoed. There you go. Bad joke, I know. It was funny on my side. So the Gestapo were there, and they were there to enforce the Nuremberg laws, and they were there to capture the Jews if necessary and do the next thing. Now, with the Gestapo as well, and I left this off, there actually is started another branch of the military, and they are called the Waffen-SS. This is that, if you've seen the little lightning bolt looking thing that Germans had on sleeve, it was the SS. And they're a kind of paramilitary group, and they are going to fight. But another thing is they are basically put in charge of the Jewish problem, as it's called. So the Waffen-SS kind of gets the Jews from the Gestapo and then administers this. Now, as this is going on in the late 1930s, some Jews have seen enough and they're going to start fleeing. And this was actually part of Hitler's plan to have forced immigration with an E, where you're leaving the country. And some notable Jews did. Albert Einstein, of course, fled to the United States, where thankfully did, because he came up with helping us out in the Manhattan Project. And a man named Otto Frank took his family to the Netherlands. Of course, when the Netherlands were found, the Jews didn't have any safe haven, and we do have the Dyer and Frank to kind of explain those things to us. Now, there is something in our U.S. history that's kind of maybe a bit unsettling, and it is the story of the St. Louis. Now, the St. Louis is a cargo ship. I put USS St. Louis, and we'll take that off. And so the St. Louis comes across and decides to go into Cuba. Now, Cuba is upset because there are so many immigrants coming into this country already, into their country rather, and they're competing with jobs, and it's a third world country. So they let 22 people actually be admitted, and the other 700 odd people aren't. Said send them to the United States. Now, when they come up trying to get to the United States, there was a problem. If you remember back in the 1920s, we talked about the Quota Acts, which set up a quota that only a certain percentage of the population could come each year. For Germany and Austria, Hungary, etc., it was at 27,000. And once they saw how bad things were going with the Jews, that number was met quite quickly. And so what happened here is the United States and Cuba turned this boat around and sent it back to Germany. Now, the interesting thing is we can compare the two ledgers here. The log of who was on this boat and the log of the people who arrived at Auschwitz share names, which means the people who were on the St. Louis eventually at one point in time were sent to Auschwitz death camp. Now, they didn't just go straight to the death camp, because it didn't actually happen like that. What the Germans did is, as they took over areas, they established a ghetto. Now, a ghetto is not a horrible part of town, the hood, whatever you want to call it. Here you have, this is ghettos occupied in Europe from 1939 until 1944. And we have some different types here. If you can tell, the yellow one here in Lodz and Warsaw and Krakow and Krakow, they were established in 1939 to about 1941. The white dots become 1941 to 1943, and the black dots become 1944. So these are the first place, and this is kind of showing you where they went, right? You can tell this is mainly Poland here, especially Warsaw, and then this is kind of pushing into the Ukraine, etc., and then with Slovakia, Hungary. And so the really interesting thing is there's only one that is close to Germany. So what is the mentality here? Why are they establishing ghettos? So first off, the ghettos, all that's referring to is when you put a certain people, in this case they're putting Jews, and they wall off the city. You can't get in, you can't get out. That's a ghetto. So maybe in the sense of that we call them a ghetto could make sense, because generally speaking they are impoverished people. They tend to be of one race a lot, and they find it difficult to get out. So maybe that's where they got the term. I don't know. But a ghetto at this time is doing that. Now, from the ghettos, they could be transported to many places. They would go to labor camps, and then eventually, when they get too full, they start sending them out to concentration camps. Now, the most infamous concentration camp that we know of is Buchenwald. Buchenwald's featured in Boy in the Striped Pajamas and other stories like that, and we have signs. Now, why did they send them to concentration camps? Under the Nazi ideology, the Aryans needed Lebensraum, which is living space, or kind of a place to stretch out. They didn't have enough space, and so they wanted space to be able to have these large families and to basically repopulate the world with the Aryan race once the Jewish people were eliminated. Now, at this point, the Jewish roundups are getting very numerous. The ghettos, as you saw on that map, are numerous. And so Hitler turns to the Waffen-SS director, who we're going to talk about in a second, to come up with a solution about what to do with, as they called, the Jewish problem. And this last section will go through what that was.